Welcome to Red, White, and Blue. I'm Gary Pollan from the right.
And Gary insists on having somebody from the left, and so here I am, David Jones.
Thank you, David. This week we're going to have a show talking about energy in Texas, still the lifeblood of this state. And we have two really important and interesting guests that are going to enlighten us. And David, if he listens. First, Ryan Sitton, who's a commissioner for the Texas Railroad Commission. Welcome, Commissioner Sitton.
Thank you.
And next we have Dr. Ramanan Krishnamoorti, who's the Chief Energy Officer at the University of Houston, and we'll let him explain what that means to you right now. So what does that mean, Chief Energy Officer?
You know, it's the University of Houston. So we are a university that's focused on energy. And I get to coordinate all of our activities in the energy space, whether it's engineering, business, or the human factors. And we do education, we do research, we do outreach. And so you've probably heard of our symposia. We bring in a lot of people here to listen to cutting edge issues on energy, but give them more than a soundbite. Right? We get them to hear different angles on it and how it impacts them. But we want to be the energy university, just like the city of Houston wants to be the energy city.
Very good.
And Texas wants to be the energy state. So
No, wants to be. Texas is.
Is all right. And despite the fact what Gary
By the way, I
says,
say that all, not tongue in cheek. That's really true.
I know, and I'm going to tell you why I understand that's going to be the case.
Okay.
Although Gary will say it came from a bad source, it was the front page of the Houston Chronicle. But
Just a questionable source.
in the very near future, the Wolf Camp and Sprayberry formations are going to be have a lot of money from Saudi Arabia put into their development, and at the end of that process of development, that field will be larger than the Ghanar of Saudi Arabia and the largest oil field in the world.
The Ghanar or the Gawar?
The Gawar, right? The Permian.
I said it first.
The Permian Basin. So, what is the impact of the hugeness of that project on the commission and your duties?
Wow, what a good question. It's a little broad, so let me try to focus here. So when you talk about the size of the Permian Basin overall, you mentioned Sprayberry and Wolf Camp. Those are two trends, two fields, but literally there are hundreds of fields in the Permian Basin. Experts' opinions on how much oil is in the Permian Basin range anywhere from, a quarter, 250 billion barrels up to 2 trillion barrels of oil that are up there, making it the largest formation in the world.
See, Gary, the Chronicle was right.
Yeah, that's shocking, right?
Ryan.
The impact, though, is not just based on the size of the formation. It is the fact that due to all the infrastructure, all the technology, the fact that we do have fantastic universities pumping out talent like the University of Houston, Texas A&M, which I'm a proud alumnus of, we have a lot of ability to develop those resources, unlike a lot of places in the world that also have oil. So the impact is this. When you look 5-10 years down the road, the Permian Basin alone could very easily producing 5, 6, 7 million barrels a day of crude oil. The world today uses 100 million barrels a day of crude oil. The Permian Basin is producing around 3, right? So when you start adding an additional 2, 3, 4 million barrels out of a single region, that's a massive economic footprint. Not just drilling and production. It's roads, it's pipelines, it's schools to support that, restaurants to support all that population. It's a tremendous economic boom. I mean, one that it's hard to overstate.
And do you happen to know the two? I think they're state companies that are getting most of the investment from Saudi Arabia, and what, if anything, will be the impact as far as jobs goes once the Saudi money starts coming in?
I'm not sure that there is. Money gets funneled into oil and gas companies a lot of different ways. I mean, you can just buy shares in an oil company, which people can do from all over the world. I do know there's one specific company that's private equity backed that a lot of that private equity is coming from Saudi Arabia, and that might be the one you're talking about. But at the end of the day, there is so much money in the world in terms of private equity to invest in everything from healthcare to transportation, but a lot of it's devoted to energy because of one simple fact. People are looking at the world saying the world uses 600 quadrillion BTUs of energy every year, and it grows every year, and that's a pretty surefire investment. So people look at the Permian Basin and say, let's put money in there. So it's not just Saudi Arabia. It's people from all over the country, all over the world investing in a place that's just a really good investment.
So did either of you get a chance to meet the Crown Prince when he showed up?
I did not.
No, unfortunately not.
No, he doesn't talk to the minions. I will say this, interesting. The Saudi oil minister is a guy named Khalid Al-Falih, and he is generally considered to be the most prominent figure in terms of energy markets. He's kind of not the head of just the Saudi oil ministry, but he's also the prominent figure in OPEC. He is a proud graduate of Texas A&M University, mechanical engineering graduate, just like me, graduated about 10 years before I did.
Giggle, man. Giggle.
There you go.
Could have been your roommate if you'd been
Whoop.
there 10 years earlier.
Whoop.
All right, here's an interesting question for you, Ryan. The Railroad Commission was created a long time ago.
1891.
And originally it was created to regulate railroads.
Yes, sir.
Okay, is the Railroad Commission still relevant in 2018?
It's very relevant, not to railroads. We do exactly zero with trains, and a lot of people in the state still don't know that. But yeah, when you look at the amount of energy production, and let me look at this on a global scale. The state of Texas today produces about 4 million barrels a day of crude oil. That's 4% of the world's hydrocarbon. We have 450,000 miles of pipelines. If they're intrastate pipelines, we regulate those as well. I mean, when you talk about 4 to 5% just of oil and gas production, the BTUs of natural gas we produce, and then couple in all the transportation, I mean, our state's touching 5, 6, 7%. You add in refining, import, and export, 10% of the world's hydrocarbon passes through Texas. We are the energy regulator for that state. We are the largest energy regulator in the world, unless you talk about the largest countries and their federal and their energy regulation groups. So a lot of people around the world will look at the Texas Railroad Commission and our models and ask, like, how do we emulate that? I was just at CERAWeek a couple of weeks ago, sat at a round table with a bunch of regulators from all over the world. I mean, and it was neat to see Ryan Sitton, USA, because I was representing not just the state of Texas, but the United States, and people talking about things in terms of how do we regulate this and look at this activity, deal with markets. I'm thinking to myself, we dealt with that like 30 years ago. I mean, really, it's amazing how far out in front we are, and I think it's a very proud thing for the entire
You see
state.
it the same way? You see it the
Absolutely.
same way?
I think the Railroad Commission plays such a central role to everything we do in the energy policy side, whether it is looking at the best ways to go and bring the oil out of the ground or to move it outside. I think it is just it is the success story for the state of Texas that we can go and proudly tell everybody in the world, follow us, because we've figured it out, and we've actually got great people working there that are not just working to improve the business today, but are looking 10, 15 years down the road to say, how do we keep it going? Because that's the beauty about Texas, is that we've had it going for a long time.
That's a great question. How do we keep it going?
I think you've got enlightened people in places like the Railroad Commission. We've got the right set of people being trained. I think we've got we might kid around about Texas A&M and UH and UT competing, but it's that combination of having that educational strength here, getting people who are not going to sit there and say keep it in the ground. That is really the revolutionary part about where we keep Texas moving forward. We are being pragmatic about it. We turn around and say we need all of the above. We want to be clean. We want to get the renewable power, but we also know that's not going to happen overnight. It's going to cost a lot of money, and we're going to do it in a systematic and well thought out way. And that's where Texas leads.
Well, Commissioner, there's a fellow I know who deals with the commission, and who kind of, and correct my figures if I'm off a little bit, but he said in 2014, the bottom dropped out, and then there started being fluctuations in the price.
Yep.
And people came into the business, they left the business, and so the question to you is, how do you manage those fluctuations in terms of staffing and dealing with the problems presented by these people who are coming and going and busting out of the business, and new additions to now that it's at a right price? I mean, that's got to be a problem.
It's a challenge for sure. And by the way, the bottom dropped out in November of 2014 when Saudi announced it wasn't going to curtail production anymore in response to the added capacity that the United States kept putting on the market, right? But also it was to try and hold, I think they made that move to try and hold other OPEC members accountable. Too much slippage was going on around the world, and everyone kept overproducing. The bottom really fell out, of course, across 2015 and even into 2016. We hit the low point in 2016, $27 a barrel. That from over 100 down to 27, now back up to 60, that's been a pretty bumpy ride. And if you go all the way back to the late 2008, 2009, and the recession, when prices went from 143, I think, all the way down into the 30s, I mean, we've had a pretty big shift. And that's been trouble for people. Some people have said, I'm just getting out. I can't take it. I'm going to get out of the industry, try to do something different.
What about people at the commission saying
So let me get back to this. The commission specifically, though, We are a fee-based agency, so we get most of our revenue, the dollars we use to fund our activities from industry. And when the bottom dropped out, we felt it too. What we had to do is we had to curtail some of our activities. We're not buying new trucks. We didn't hire. We didn't have to do any layoffs, but we couldn't hire some of the staff we wanted to. We couldn't plug some of the wells we wanted to. So there was a lot of our activities we had to scale back on. But I will say, coming back in the 2017 legislative session, the legislature gave the Texas Railroad Commission the largest increase of any agency in the state on a percentage basis, recognizing the critical role that we played. And we're catching up now on some of those activities that we couldn't do back then to respond to the fact that we're now on a big growth path.
Well, one of the things that we've noticed happening in the news is there's lots of things that happen that impact this industry. Latest being the tariffs war. We declared tariffs, the Chinese declared tariffs, and to be fair, David, Trump's right that we haven't been treated fairly by the Chinese in trade, but that's a separate issue. My question is about the impact of tariffs on the oil and gas industry in Texas.
I would say, and I'd like to hear Ramanan's opinion on this, but quickly, what we hear on a kind of tactical local level is two things. First of all, the cost of steel. I mean, everything we do in the industry is made of steel, right? Whether it's tubing, it's drilling rigs, it's trucks that we drive, all that steel in them. I've heard some of the more sophisticated operators say things like when they did an aggregate of the increased cost of, say, 10 or 20% tariff added cost on steel, that the lift cost at the well is somewhere going to be in the 3 to 4%. So not untenable. But if you're in really slim margins, that can be enough that, hey, I'm going to shut in some wells. I just can't operate that way. So it's touchy there. The bigger impact probably has been the impact on prices as the volatility of language has escalated. People have said, these are the two biggest economic powers in the world. And if they're arguing, that could mean an economic slowdown, and nothing causes the price, global demand for oil to slow down like an economic slowdown. And so you saw prices dip for the last couple of weeks into the 60s range. It's come back over the last couple of weeks as that has cooled. In fact, Chinese president, I think just a day or two ago, made some pretty public statements about trying to solve this with dialogue. And that you saw immediately, the day that he made that announcement, price of oil jumped $2.50.
Exactly.
And how are you sharing with the people interacting with the commission who are seeking permits and the like, so that they may know how to keep their energy production safe? How we have safe.
You're talking about national security?
No, I'm talking about fracking. I'm talking about the
Terrorism.
water that comes up and
environment,
methane, contamination of our water resources. I mean, is that part of your job as far as keeping them informed as far as best practices go to keep us a safe energy, no earthquake state?
Yeah, so you hit like 19 different subjects, so I'm going to use up the rest of our
David's
time.
style.
Some of you said there, and forgive me, the geek in me comes out here. Methane doesn't contaminate water sources. It's
No.
people. So just to make sure people
contaminate.
don't want to confuse.
Even I know that.
Okay, just wanted, but didn't want to confuse people. Yes, that is part of our responsibility. From the time someone drills a well, oil coming out of the ground, putting it in a pipeline, shipping it wherever it's going, that value chain, that product, that liquid, that fluid is our responsibility in terms of making sure that it doesn't get out. And look, it does sometimes. And when it does, it's our job to make sure it's cleaned up efficiently and tested and effectively, and the traces are all removed. So yeah, we have all those responsibilities. And in general, I'm very proud of our track record. I mean, we always have opportunities to improve, and how we engage the public is a big part of that.
I think it was in Pennsylvania where they had the contamination of true water sources.
In New York, they had state of New York had that, and it happens because of natural seeps. It isn't something that is a large-scale prevalent problem, and I think we ought to tone down that issue of methane going to aquifers as being a substantive issue. Yes, it has happened. It has happened where casings have been badly cemented. Yes, very rare, happened very early on. We ought to move on from that point. I think there are bigger issues. I think you've got issues of fugitive methane leaks. That's been addressed. The industry has been extremely proactive, along with environmental groups, to ensure that there's a valuable product. Why would I want to let it out into the atmosphere? Why would I want to flare it? I want to find a way to use it. They understand it. They brought in technology. And technology has come in a way to transform this industry in manners that I think none of us could have fathom 15 years ago.
So is it fair to say that you believe that the commission is doing a great job in terms of dealing with the environmental challenges of fracking?
I believe that we are, and I will say that, in fact, I think the environmental challenges that face the industry as a whole, actually most of which are not so closely tied to fracking. I mean, people have kind of picked up on this term, fracking, and they confuse it with drilling, they confuse it with disposal, they confuse it with pipeline. What exactly is fracking? When you go down 8,000 feet in the ground and you have permeations of 500 feet. I mean, this is not close to a water source. It's not close to a water table. To pick on something you mentioned, David, about seismicity. It's been something that we've really dealt with over the last couple of years.
I use that word.
You use earthquakes.
Seismicity. I'll make
use
it even
earthquakes.
more.
Learned a new word.
Earthquakes.
Yeah, sorry, use earthquakes. It's been something that
Let me write that down.
Yeah, sorry. Seismicity. I try to come up with a couple smart words to sound smart.
Yeah,
Thanks,
you're,
Dad.
you're an Aggie. You're entitled.
Well, that was my only smart word I have for the day, so you've stolen it. It's something we studied a lot, and people ask the question, Ryan, is it possible for oil and gas operations to have some impact on earthquakes, on seismicity? Yeah, absolutely, it's possible. So fracking can cut? No, I didn't say fracking, I said oil and gas activities. We've been studying very heavily over the last 3 years the impact of disposal wells. You asked about water. It's disposal wells. Have nothing to do with hydraulic fracturing, right? It's just produced water coming out of a well. But you ask the average person, they think we're researching fracking tied to seismicity. So it's a constant effort to go out and educate the public when they're concerned, because it's so easy to get confused. But back to your question, Gary, you look at all the different areas of the industry. We certainly have room to improve on some things as an industry, as a regulator, as a state. But by and large, a very good track record that we ought to be real proud of.
And oil and gas industry made out like a bandit in the recent tax cut bill, because on the corporate side they got it. The drilling, the intangible drilling costs still are written off. I mean, they didn't lose anything.
Who really made out like a bandit in the recent day? Business owners, and therefore everyone who works for a business. That's everybody. Well, just telling you that
whatever it was given to the oil and gas industry over the years as a write-off was protected. I mean, is it the case that the oil and gas industry is running Congress?
Yeah.
Nobody runs Congress.
Yeah, really.
Does Congress run?
Yeah, sure, yeah, exactly. I've heard a lot over, all these subsidies that go to oil and gas companies, and there aren't any. I mean, I don't know where people get that from. Look, the largest industry as a taxpayer in the state of Texas is the oil and gas industry. They pay more in taxes than anybody else does, by a healthy margin. You look at the state's $80 billion a year total state budget. The biggest chunk comes from oil and gas. And a lot of these taxes, from severance taxes to property taxes on leases, I mean, we either oversee or administer these things. I don't know where the tax breaks are that people talk about. Now, there are the same tax write-offs that every company gets, capital expenditures, business expenditures, that sort of thing. But the individual ones for oil and gas, they're just not there. I think that's a lot of a misnomer or misconception that people have.
Did we have some dangerous conditions in Houston and the Houston region after Harvey as a result of the release of chemicals into the air, the water? And what did the industry, or rather the commission, do as far as getting the energy infrastructure that we have back up to speed after the collapse of some of it?
Yeah, that's a great question. The short version is that there was not much in the way of risk. And the area the Railroad Commission looks at, right, we're talking about wells, pipelines, storage tanks. In general, we had, watched it very carefully. Our inspectors were out literally in the hours following the hurricane, rains, lightning, checking on everything, working with operators, making sure things were inspected and monitored. And yeah, I mean, there were a few areas where you had some leaks, had some dikes that gave way, but operators responded quickly, had berms out there. Really, the containment was strong. So I felt like, that by and large, we had a really good response to Harvey. Now, there's additional issues, which are, pipelines were shut down, which caused some of the gasoline scares, which we saw all over the state. And we can talk about that because it was 99% a communications issue. But in terms of the potential release chemicals in water, we saw very little impacts and nothing that lasted, that wasn't contained.
And there was things that happened down in the downstream side. Downstream chemicals had a few, and those made national news.
Which we don't regulate, so that's why.
That's not your fault.
But compare that.
But Gary didn't see it. It was national news, so he didn't see it.
Let's just compare what happened during Harvey, downstream chemicals, compared to what happened after Katrina in 2005, downstream
that's
chemicals.
terrible. Oh.
Just what has been learned by the industry is substantial. They've hardened infrastructure. We had 51 inches of rain. Never before have we had that kind of rain. And yet, the kinds of leaks that we saw were minuscule compared to what we saw during Katrina. Yes, there's work to be done. I think there are lessons to be learned. I think there's some coordination efforts that need to be done between state, federal, and the private companies. But it's a work in progress. But I think we've learned a lot, and I think we implemented a lot from the natural disasters that have happened in the past.
If you want to get a permit to do anything from the Railroad Commission, is it have there been improvements in terms of the time it takes for the permit application to be reviewed?
Can you do it online?
Yeah.
Yes. Now, it depends on what you're getting a permit for, right? If you're getting a permit to drill an oil well, it takes an average of 2.7 days, right? So that's fast. If you want to get a permit to open a new coal mine, it takes a long time, right? So it depends on what process you're looking at, what processes you're permitting, and disposal wells, and where the disposal wells are located. So it's hard to give you a quick answer for that. I will say that when you go back to the boom of 2013, 2014, our permit times were long. And you heard lots of complaints from industry. Hey, I ordered an expedited drilling permit, and it's taking months to get it. And this is not a complex permit. It's an administrative thing, but we were so backlogged and didn't have the staff. And this was before I got there. But to give credit to those commissioners and the staff then, they added staff. They brought back some retired staff to add to the permitting group so they could respond to that market need. And today we're in really good shape.
And kudos to the state for having invested in getting the right number of staff for the commission. I think that's really debottlenecked a lot of it.
Yeah.
So is there anything at the commission you'd like to be doing and you don't have the resources to do?
Probably the biggest thing is we've got a backlog of abandoned wells, but we're getting the resources. So what's happened over the last couple of years, and I've been a pretty big advocate for this, is we collect so much money from the industry. I mean, literally, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars come to the state coffers. Let me keep a little bit more of that and only plug some wells with it. Now, in general, we've done a good job, but we've got a bigger backlog than we're comfortable with. And then this last legislative session, the state legislature did grant us the ability to hold on to a few more of those dollars and plug some more wells. So we're working that problem down.
Do you run into bad actors that come to the commission? Are there ones that are violating rules and regulations? And if so, what punishments do you have to keep that from happening?
First of all, bad actors do not come to the commission. We come to them. Right? The people who come to the commission are good actors, right? And in fact, if I can, for just a minute, give a personal anecdote. People often question, the relationship. Hey, industry and the Railroad Commission, that seems a little cozy, right? I tell you this, in my entire 3 years in office and the year and a half I was campaigning for office, I've never once had a meeting with an oil and gas guy who was, say, a donor, who asked me for any special treatment or to remove or to lighten up regulation. Their statements or their requests were twofold. One, please make sure we have efficient, effective regulation. And two, if there is a bad operator, please take them out because they make life tough on all of us. So yes, to answer your question, we've seen those operators.
So what's the procedure for taking somebody out?
So we have an enforcement division, right? So let's say we come across someone who's had a spill and didn't report it. Right? Our inspector goes out, they find him, they say, hey, you got a spill out here. What are you doing about it? I don't know if we're going to do it. We'll go out there, we can fine them if we need to. We can fine them again if we need to. In fact, we can issue hefty fines. Eventually what happens is you get a license to operate from the Railroad Commission, what's called a P5. We will sever their P5 and say you can't operate anymore. Now they're out of business, can't collect revenues anymore. So we can do everything from fines to removing their ability to operate, and the combination of those two things and also requiring them to do additional things. You have to do testing. You have to do monitoring. So we can get pretty aggressive when we need to. I will tell you, luckily we don't have to do that very often. Usually we get involved. People say, hey, yep, we're not where we want to be. Work with us. Help us get there.
As long as we have been doing this, as far as this industry goes, you would think that we would have attracted a pretty effective group and a pretty responsible group of actors that are coming into you're coming to the commission.
Absolutely.
You would think that it would be.
You say the commission. Operators in the state, by and large, are very responsible, good stewards. They're good community members.
But all it takes is one, right? Who doesn't
that's
follow
what
the
we're watching
rules.
for.
And I'll tell you what,
and I think that's the hard one too.
I was a little nervous about this because of the arcane subject matter and whatnot that you were thinking was going to throw us off because of of the subject matter. But you, sir, have made it a very interesting show for me to be a part of.
You
And
learned something.
I learned something, and I want to thank you for being as accomplished as you are as a commissioner.
Thank you.
And best of luck to you.
Thank you.
And that is Red, White, and Blue for tonight, and we will see you next week.